Now, I suppose you've noticed that all the remaining seconds are gone. So we'll start the questions and answers session. We'll take questions from the tables for Dr. Bury, we have pointed out that there were conversation starters, so that the public would know that. Yes, now.
Thank you. Dave on table 4. In relation to Article 43.3, where it explicitly states the equal right to life of the unborn, as it stands now at the moment, if that article was to be repealed, would there be a conflict of interests from Medical Council guidance regarding the fetus, where a woman to present herself requesting or needing a termination, where at the moment it explicitly states that the right to life is equal. So, it's a very simple decision for a doctor to make, that, they have to make sure that the fetus is looked after. But if that explicit article was removed from the Constitution, would that make the doctor, or force the doctor into being a conscientious objector, that they couldn't do their utmost to protect the life of the fetus, or would they still be obliged under Medical Council guidelines to still protect the life of the fetus?
Thanks for that. I repeat, I can't speak on behalf of the Medical Council, and I'm not sure any individual, even its members, can or should offer hypothetical responses to changes in the law. What I can do is outline the process to you by which the Council responds to the law. It's not above the law, but it has a separate legislative responsibility to address issues of professional and ethical importance to the profession, over and above and separately to what the law of the land says at the time. I think Council takes very seriously indeed, as does the profession, the law of the land. The Ward of Court case in the 1990s illustrated to some extent, though, how Council may not feel that the current legislation or law of itself requires complete compliance by the medical profession if it feels that there's an ethical or moral principle that is at odds between the two. I think if the law were to change in relation to if the Constitution were to change in relation to 43.3, I can tell you that Council would look very carefully indeed at that change. It would invite submissions from the public and from all interested parties. It would certainly consider the implications in either a special ethical guide to be issued or drawn up at the time, or in the subsequent one. Council is made up of a membership of 25, which reflects the full spectrum of Irish society, and those views equally would, I think, be represented across the board when Council finally made decisions on what guidance to offer doctors. I think the issue of conscientious objection is a very important one. It can always be available to doctors. I don't see it ever being removed from the ethical framework under which doctors operate, or nurses or other healthcare professionals, because I think we all have similar struggles with these issues. I wouldn't dream again to speak for other professionals, but I don't want to in some way suggest this is unique to doctors. I think the option of conscientious objection must remain available. Individual doctors may choose to exercise it. It would very much depend on any council guidance changing in response to a constitutional change.
Thank you, Your Honour. My question is directed to Professor Gerard Bury. And the question is, when you presented, Professor, with really difficult cases, such as end of life, what helps you to make the right choice?
No, that's a tough question. The four issues I've outlined are ones that we not only offer as guidance to our students and trainees, but are ones that I hold very dearly to me, and I think most colleagues do, in some form or other. I will answer that as a personal question, I suppose, rather than on anyone else's behalf. I have to be able to sleep at night. So fundamentally, my values, my attitudes need to be reconciled with the options that are available to me. I further want to believe that I have reconciled the options available with the needs of the patient or the family that I'm dealing with. The right choice is usually the one that the patient believes is their own best, in their own best interests. Occasionally, and I think increasingly as I presented to you, we will have challenges where expressed interests by a patient are at odds with what I believe to be in their best interests. Where a patient has written down some weeks, months or years previously what should happen in certain circumstance. Perhaps that's not the best choice in the current situation. At the end of the day, I will respect the patient's decision, and to some extent I believe that's probably the best choice I can make.
Professor Burry, I'm the facilitator for Table 4, and we have 3 questions for you. The first question is, as the law stands today, where a woman presents with a crisis pregnancy in a part of the country where there is very limited access to medical care, if her doctor objects on a conscientious basis, what are that woman's options? The second question is, in your experience, does the conscientious objection apply differently in a situation between public health care and private health care? And then finally, it has been reported recently about cases under the professional standards and fitness to practice aspects where it turns out that a doctor was not properly educated or not properly trained. And the question from this table was, how do situations like that occur?
Again, really important questions, and again may cover a broader spectrum than perhaps the issues just at hand. The final one first. Council's first responsibility is the registration of appropriately trained doctors. There are currently over 20,000 individual doctors registered with the Medical Council, and something like 11,000 currently in practice in the country. The backgrounds, the legislation, the training frameworks which those 20,000 doctors are drawn from are very diverse. So one answer to your question is there's a rigorous process of assessment of the education a doctor offers, but that's a paper process to a large extent. Certainly for doctors travelling from other EU states, it's purely administrative. For doctors coming from outside the EU, there are some assessments of competence. Second part of that is Council has introduced competence assurance procedures so that the maintenance of my competence is assessed on a fairly regular basis, at a fairly light touch level, I would have to say to you still, but in common with other bodies and professions around the world. Not only is there a decision made on how competent I am at entry, but I have to reassure you, the public, my patients and the Council that I continue to be competent to offer the service. Inevitably, in a big world, gaps occur. And our business is to make that as effective a process as possible, but in the real world, it'll never be perfect. The second issue of conscientious objection, I have to say to you, I cannot cite a case of conscientious objection in the public arena to you, and I'm not aware that in a formal sense that has been exercised in a way that I can report to you. Therefore, I'm absolutely unable to say to you whether a public or private setting for the case is influencing that or is likely to influence that. Your first question about limited care in geographic areas of the country, it's a real-world issue. Choice, our medical card system, the GMS system, is actually known as the Choice of Doctor scheme. And it fundamentally is based around encouraging our patients to understand they have choice. Geographic limitation is an issue, but I believe, excuse me, that there are always other sources of information and advice available to people, to our patients and their families. Inevitably, in the real world, if there are only very small numbers of services in a particular part of the country, you will have to travel, you will have to ask advice, you will have to seek out sources of other information. But Council's requirement is that the doctor who feels they cannot assist the patient at the first contact has an obligation to make those further contacts on behalf of the patient. Not to provide the service, but to not simply tell the patient that I refuse to take part in this exercise, off you go and find advice. As that doctor, I have an absolute obligation to facilitate the patient in being made, in having access to further advice.
We'll take a question from table 13.
Thank you very much. The table would like to acknowledge Professor Bury answering a question at the table regarding the makeup of the council, how members are appointed and its method of working. So they'd like to thank that. In relation to the specific question, now the citizens are keen to find out on what grounds currently can a doctor refuse to provide treatment or procedure, and is it a specific procedure or every procedure, and how are these known?
Good question. I think I, on my slide, quoted the single sentence in the Medical Council's Guide on Conscientious Objection, and it simply says, sincerely held ethical or moral values. If, on the basis of those sincerely held ethical or moral values, I believe I should not take part in a procedure or accede to a request or be involved in the care of a patient, then I can choose to opt out. There are no further guides, and I think that exemplifies the principled approach of the guidance that Council offers. It's not a code book in which you can look up how this clinical problem or that one should be managed. It simply says, if you are going to use or exercise that conscientious objection route, you must of course be then able and willing to support it if it is challenged. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Could I just add that I was surprised when I was looking at the Protection of Life During Pregnancy Act 2013 in advance of today to see that the expression conscientious objection isn't defined in the Act. So it's what is understood generally by the expression. And I think Professor Bury has told us what is understood by the expression. So any other question?
Go here and then table 2.
Thank you, Judge. I'm the facilitator for table 8. The professor kindly answered a question for the citizens at this table, but it was felt that it might be of interest to the other citizens in the Assembly to hear the answer that you gave us. So if you don't mind, I will ask you the question again. Does the 8th Amendment compromise you as a doctor in the clinical treatment of a pregnant woman in your practice? And sorry, just before you answer that again, there was also wanted to make a proposal to the Secretariat in relation to the advocacy groups, and that there would be a request to those who are invited to present that they don't just present on their own stated position, but that they might be asked to present workable solutions to the problem. And a further point is that, if possible, that there would be non-religious advocacy groups, because it's felt that if an advocacy group is from one particular faith or the other, they just have to invite all of those, all of the different religious groups. Thank you.
I should just say, just for the sake of clarity, we were using the expression advocacy groups, you know, as shorthand for all of the organisations that have written in as part of the submission process, and are representative of a cohort of people. So say, for example, political parties are included in that listing. There's 115 of them. They're on our website. But just for the sake of clarity, some of those organisations are not advocacy groups, and I think it's important to state that, and that includes the churches and so on. So just wanted to make that point for the sake of clarity.
Professor Bury, your question.
Thank you for the question, which came up in circulation a little. Let me cut to the answer, I suppose, which is, at a personal level, I believe that my practice has changed over 30 years based on the huge leaps forward in education and empowerment that our citizens demonstrate. And it seems to me that, again, perhaps I can speak from my own perspective as a GP, initially at least, my role has been to support and answer and offer clarification to those women or couples or women with their parents sometimes who will come and explore the unplanned pregnancy that now troubles them. Does the Eighth Amendment intrude on that process? To a very limited extent, I would have to say to you. The process of consultation between a doctor and their patient is ultimately an intensely private one, and it's not in any way to suggest that that conversation goes outside the bounds of law or professional governance or guidance, but in offering honest answers to those issues that patients or their families raise, the constitutional issues rarely raise their head.
Thank you very much.
I'm a citizen from Table 2, and Professor Bury has actually answered 2 of our questions already, so just 2 further ones. In trying to get an example of current situation regarding conscientious objectors, would you have any information or experience in relation to the area of blood transfusions, particularly in the context of where some religious groupings do not accept them, but also in the context that if a doctor was a member of such a group, may object to giving blood transfusions? And then secondly, Finally, does the current curriculum and training for doctors include termination of pregnancy?
Again, the second, initially, if I can, it is important that all doctors who potentially will deal with termination of pregnancy understand the process and understand the consequences and understand how to support those who are considering such routes or the aftercare of patients in those situations or their families. Again, I can't speak on behalf of my gynecological or obstetric colleagues to any great extent, but I believe the curriculum addresses the issues, certainly from a general practice point of view, to the extent that I've just described it. The process of achieving termination of pregnancy is not a skill set nor a competence which is included on any curricular material that I'm familiar with at all. Secondly, conscientious objection. As I've said, I suspect that public awareness, and I include myself in that, of episodes of conscientious objection is very limited indeed. I can very much foresee the situation that you've described, though, where a doctor or nurse with a personal moral objection to transfusion medicine, for instance, could and would refuse to take part in such a delivery of a blood transfusion. I can envisage that happening, and that I think would be entirely encompassed within the current guide and would be perfectly acceptable. Clearly, others would then step in who don't have that reservation and provide that service. At the moment, in terms of patients who have moral or religious objections to transfusions, those issues have increasingly come to the courts for resolution rather than simply falling within the ambit of a decision made by a doctor or a team.
Good afternoon, Professor. I'm a facilitator for Table 12. The members of this table have a question. As an abortion pill can be ordered over the internet, do you agree that we currently have abortion in Ireland? And following from that, from a medical point of view, do you believe such a pill should be prescribed and supervised?
I think those are the $64 million questions.
Definitely, most definitely.
Which, if you think I'm going to answer those, you might arrange my my exit visa. I think the issue, the response I gave a moment ago, empowerment and education are the answers to most things in the world. And in my life, I think I've been increasingly impressed by people's ability to make their own decisions, and my job is to respect the decisions that people make. The technological and scientific progress and the mail systems mean that people make decisions that are entirely outside the healthcare system at the moment at many levels, whether it's steroids to build up your muscles, or whether it is misoprostol to end pregnancy, or whether it's a whole bunch of other forms of advice or medication that lie completely outside the healthcare system. Those decisions are being made by people on a practical day-to-day basis. Neither the law, the Constitution, nor the guidance to the medical profession supports those routes. And to the extent that they are utterly unregulated, they are a real challenge and a real problem, and they have their, at a very practical level, they have their potential harms that perhaps we need to better empower people to address. And to that extent, I think it's really important that the doors open to patients and their families who in any way feel that things aren't going right, even if they have chosen to stay outside the medical care system to set the ball rolling in terms of a particular procedure or drug or medicine. The second issue, it's an impossible question to give you an answer to at this stage. I think I would very seriously respond that the medical profession and the healthcare professions are here to serve the communities in which we are placed. We must respect and look very carefully at the law, at the views of society as expressed through gatherings like this one, and we must place those against the background of the ethical and moral principles that guide our professions, and then report to the citizens and the communities that we serve how we believe we should meet the challenges you've posed us. I think that's how it will happen in the future.
I'm the facilitator at table 9. The members of this table have 3 questions. The first one is there a list of GPs or consultants who are conscientious objectors so that a woman knows in advance what the doctor's position is? The second question is from your report, Dr. Berry, page 6, section 14.1, regarding emergency situations. Does that refer to the life of the mother and the unborn? And the third question is page 6, paragraph 3, regarding medical counsel and abortion. The care and support follow-up, he'd like to know if the care and support follow-up is adequate post-abortion in relation to the mental and physical care.
Yeah, thanks for those. Let me try and answer them briefly. First, there is no list of conscientious objectors. As I say, I'm not aware that there are any public identifications of such cases. Secondly, the guidance from the Council in care of any emergency simply says you should act in the patient's best interests. In an emergency, at a practical level, and where an emergency occurs involving a pregnant woman, in clinical terms, the care of her baby is the care of the woman. And in very practical terms, there's very little distinction between the two when a life-threatening injury or illness occurs. Now, clearly, a further decision about the substantial risk to the life of the woman arising from the pregnancy itself is dealt with by the Constitution and by the guidance that you have in front of you. But in other situations where someone's been acutely injured or become acutely ill, broadly, there's no real difference in the clinical approach towards the woman who is pregnant. Her baby does best if she does well. Your third question was about aftercare. There's no question but that is understood to encompass the physical, the psychological and the social aspects of those difficulties that a woman or a family may experience following termination of pregnancy. And our responsibility as doctors or nurses is to support and address each of those needs.
We'll take one more question. We'll take table 7. Table 11, sorry.
Thank you. I'm the facilitator for table 11, and we have 2 questions on this table for Professor Brewery. The first is there a divergence of opinion on the Medical Council in relation to the 8th Amendment and abortion? And secondly, is there any statistical analysis on individual doctors' opinions regarding the current position on abortion in Ireland? Thank you.
Very brief answers, I'm afraid. As I've said, and I do want to repeat, I can't speak for the Council, and I have no awareness or information on the views of members, nor is it appropriate for anyone, I think, to offer such external views. The Council has to speak for itself. Secondly, I'm not aware of any specific robust scientific data surveying the medical profession at the moment on their views about the 8th Amendment or the current legal position in relation to termination of pregnancy.
Very good. Well, it's been a most interesting. I think
there's one table that have a very burning question.
Oh, yeah, sorry. There is a question. Yeah, just one. Yeah.
This is just to the Chair. Just in response to the request that faith-based groups be denied the possibility of addressing the Assembly on the basis that every faith-based group would have to be heard, I think the same argument would apply to every secular-based group, so I don't think it's a fair request.
Yeah, very good. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I was just... what?
Doesn't matter. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh yeah, I'll just say thanks. Yeah. What I was about to say was, I think you should all show your appreciation of a very interesting talk from Professor Bury. Both the talk and the questions and answers, fantastic. Thank you very much. We're very grateful to you. We're going to have a short reflective exercise now. You're going to take 15 minutes to reflect on what you've heard over the course of the weekend, and we have...
Sorry folks, can we just have your attention please for this, just while the judge explains what we're about to undertake here. Thanks.
Yeah. There's going to be a period of 15 minutes to quietly reflect on what you've heard over the weekend. To guide those reflections, you're being asked 3 questions. These are, first, do you think a right to life of the unborn should continue to be constitutionally protected in the same way as it is now? Secondly, do you think that the X case and the Act of 2013 make abortion lawfully available in Ireland in too many circumstances? And then finally, do you think that abortion should be lawfully available in Ireland in more circumstances than is currently the case? And a copy, just to say, a blank, if I may put it that way, a blank copy of the document which you're going to consider is up on the website. And we will not be presenting a summary of your reflections. The reflection exercise is a personal exercise to help you. So you have 15 minutes to consider that.
And just to note that, as before, this is a silent exercise. It's for yourselves. It's not one to consult with your other members. It's just for you to note what your thoughts are. And so we'd ask everybody in the room to respect that, and just the media and observers and so on are leaving the room, but just that there be silence to allow you to do that work. And the facilitators and note takers have been asked to leave the tables. Thank you.